Warehouse and operations as a career, and I guess we're on, episode 72 here today. I'm Marty, and I'm back home in Texas this week. I've been traveling the last couple of weeks, been up north and played in the snow for a while. Each quarter, I try and visit several facilities. I stop in on a couple of production facilities and several distribution centers and perform some observations and visit with associates and customers for business reviews. I really enjoy those conversations and the opportunity I have to learn really from everyone. I was lucky enough to meet with several newcomers to our industry and a few individuals that just recently got promoted to the lead and supervisor positions. You know, through my visits, I noticed kind of a recurring thought that I was having. The word responsibility came up with almost every one or position that was discussed. We've spoken to the responsibilities of our jobs and our careers on several different episodes. I just kind of found it interesting, and I was excited to hear all these new associates recognizing the points of their jobs and planning as they were towards their careers. One of the things that I'm looking at when I enter a facility is the sanitation practices. What the transportation yard looks like. Is the fence line clean, or are there leaves and debris blown up into the fence, and are the bollard posts? I know a lot of us call them ballard posts, but anyway. Are they nice and yellow or red, or has the paint been knocked off or faded really bad? Another thing I check out are all the trailers or containers. Are they locked to the docks, or are the wheels chocked? Several facilities I'm involved with requires glad hand locks or airline lockout devices that's applied to the red airline on the trailers. We've had a few episodes where we've mentioned audits and how every facility is subject to some kind of regulatory concern each year. Maybe city, state, or federal agencies could be stopping by. Oh, and probably a fire marshal or building inspector even. You know, as employees, it's all of our responsibility to follow the practices and procedures in place for our safety and to adhere to those regulations of our industry. If I find all those things look good, I'd bet the facility will have all their paperwork in place with every employee being safety conscious. I usually find a very strong safety culture within the shifts. Now, on the other hand, if all that isn't 100%, I know I'll probably find a few deficiencies with the safety practices and procedures. It's kind of the same with the docks, isn't it? If the unloaders or lumpers keep their work area clean, from pieces of broken pallets or torn shrink wrap, you can pretty much bet the rest of the warehouse is going to be in top-notch shape. Many times an auditor or inspector won't even go into the aisles, if it's not a regulatory audit, of course, but he or she can tell just that quickly what the sanitation and safety cultures are within the first 20 minutes or so of walking around. I might even stop a couple of equipment operators and ask them to see their operator's license and maybe ask them a couple of questions too. That's a great way to meet them, shake their hands, and let them know, how great a job they're doing. Another place one can get an idea of how well a facility runs is checking out the break room. Are there storage areas for lunches provided? Plates and utensils, or are things stacked in windowsills and counters? That's another good indicator to an auditor of how the facility's being ran. I know as an employee, these things seem, a little trivial, especially when looked at individually, but you can see how important they become as a whole in an auditor's or agent's world. I had an associate bring up a concern about a write-up he had received for his lunch being on his equipment. He had came in for his shift, and since the equipment room was closer to the door than the break room, he'd placed his lunch on his forklift, done his pre-trip, and was driving his lift up to the break room. Well, his supervisor had stopped him on the way and questioned him about having food in the warehouse and on his equipment. We were in a food distribution facility, and according to their GMPs or general maintenance practices, there could be no food in the warehouse, and come to find out, he'd actually been cautioned at least on 2 other occasions for the very same thing. I can see how to us as employees that doesn't seem like a big deal, but had the supervisor been an auditor or inspector, they would have had no problem pointing out that our GMP clearly stated that no food or lunches were to be outside the break room, and points would have been immediately deducted from our score, or possibly the company could have been fined. Another thing I hear a lot about is our safety vest and steel-toe shoes too. If we're just walking across the floor and we're not wearing our PPEs, although we haven't started working yet, and we're observed by an auditor, it's a big deal because our practices and processes are written and state that while in the area, PPEs will be worn. A lot of those little rules, as simple as they seem to us, are there and enforced for a reason, a much bigger picture. I witnessed an employee getting really upset with a lead because she mentioned to him to put on his vest. He felt it was not really necessary, but it was. That's how it's written, and for a reason probably. And please don't believe for a minute that a regulatory inspector wouldn't enforce it and really ding the company for it. Another thing that's a lot more important than it seems are egress doorways or emergency exits. Every facility I know has written that doorways are not to be blocked at any time. I'm sure we've all seen someone place a pallet in front of a doorway for just a minute, maybe just be moving a pallet or, grabbing something behind it. And yep, that's an infraction. And if we're all being honest, we've probably seen that pallet being forgotten about and the doorway is left blocked. I'm not sure why it happens or how it actually happens, but I have facilities that have to mention it every week in their startup meetings. Even if things are congested and really cramped, all doorways have to be clear. It's written, and it's just a rule. It's a regulation, actually, so there's not really a leg to stand on in our defense. We could easily lose our jobs by not following such rules. It's just not worth getting upset about. Another one of those rules that's hard to understand may be no gum chewing or hard candy allowed in the warehouse. We could talk about how used gum sometimes ends up in the warehouse, on pallets, or even sometimes product, and candy may end up on the floor on occasion. But there's not really much to discuss. It's written in our GMPs that there's no hard candy or gum chewing allowed in the warehouse, so there's no reason it should come up. Yet, someone gets upset about it from time to time and may even receive some kind of corrective action for it. So how do we as associates, leads, or supervisors, handle rules, procedures, or our company's processes? I think as an associate, we just need to remember we're at work. We're being paid for our hard work. That pay includes following all the regulatory concerns, processes, and procedures, right? I know it's really hard, and it is hard. We can say things like, I just had my lunch on the forklift for like 5 minutes, or I was just crossing the aisle on my way to the lockers to put on my steel-toe shoes, or I just hadn't spit out my gum yet. I had just came in from the parking lot. All that makes sense, and yes, it's innocent enough, but in the regulatory world of our industry, it's just not really permitted. As a lead or a supervisor, we have to protect the company by following and enforcing the regulations, procedures, and processes. I feel it's important that as employees, leads, or supervisors, it's all of our responsibility to create that work culture, sanitation culture, and strong safety culture within ourselves. If we do that, all those things won't ever happen, and we'll never have to be concerned with penalties or fines from any regulatory agency. Oh, and real quick, another thing that came up on my visits, let's talk for just a minute about the time clock. So many associates and supervisors get frustrated weekly over the timekeeping. Us as associates, we want our pay correct each pay period. It should be correct. It needs to be correct. We've worked very hard for it. Pretty much all timekeeping systems are computer-driven these days. With a typical system, we punch in at start of shift, punch out when we go to lunch, punch back in after lunch, and then punch out when we finish up and are going to the house. The computer tracks it, it gets turned in, and we get paid correctly. But what if we as associates forget to make one of those punches, or we punched in earlier than we were supposed to? Our time's going to be messed up. Our pay is going to be wrong, and we may get upset about it. Now, of course, our payroll department is going to correct it. We're going to get paid for what we've done, but it could be the following week, as many companies can't just cut another check or make another payroll run. Believe it or not, and really understandably, sometimes an associate will get upset over a payroll opportunity. But because I forgot to punch or didn't punch correctly, it's going to take someone else's time to correct it, something that can be quite time-consuming depending on the system. It might involve a couple of people to get it corrected. As an associate, it's our responsibility to punch correctly, and should we make a mistake, we need to let our management team know immediately so they can correct it as soon as possible. I feel as leads and supervisors, it's our responsibility to help our associates learn to use the clock. Make it convenient to use, follow up, or check its information before the records go in each week, and coach our employees if errors do occur. We are all working for money. I hope we're doing something we really enjoy, but we're working for the money, and I've always felt our pay should be a top priority to everyone. It's our responsibility as associates to keep our time correctly, and as leads and soups, we should follow up and make sure it's correct every pay period. Here at WAOC, we're always pointing out that it's to our advantage to get noticed by our management team in a positive way. Helping build a strong work culture within our shifts, participating with the programs, and teaching them to others are great ways to achieve just that. I hope we all want to take on that next task, reach for that next promotion, and be hungry for that success. I hope we brought up something that spurs a spark or created a thought for you today. And if you have an experience you'd like to share, send us an email to host@warehouseandoperationsasacareer.com, and we'll try to get it out in front of the group. You can also use our Twitter and Facebook feeds using the little @ WHSEANDOPS on either one of those platforms. And if you have a moment, check out the Facebook group, Warehouse Equipment Operators Community. We're having a lot of fun and communication with it as well. We've talked about several of our responsibilities as associates, leads, and supervisors today, but let's not forget our biggest responsibility is keeping each other safe in the workplace and being safe in our home life as well. My thanks to you all. Hope you stop in again next week, and let's remember, safety is our first responsibility.